Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Game Tier Weekend where we take a look at some of the best games that you can play. And really, what a year it's been. The Switch 2 finally released, and the hype for this thing was just sky high. It's coming off arguably Nintendo's best generation ever, a generation where they had so many great games, and they sold 150 plus million consoles, which is just unbelievable to say the least. Now the question though is, did it live up to that hype, and is it worth the upgrade? And I think in terms of games, I think it's already proven to be a fantastic console. So we're going to take a look at 12 different games I think makes the Switch 2 ultimately worth it. Now this list is in no specific order, but first up is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3+4. I think this is just one of those games that really showcases the upgrade from the Switch 1. What we're seeing here is that the Switch 2 is going to get a lot more meaningful third-party games this generation that can actually hold their own in comparison to other consoles. This is not a Witcher 3 situation where it had to be massively downgraded just to play on the Switch 1. No, Tony Hawk 3+4 actually looks and performs very well on the Switch 2. I believe it's a 1080p 60 frames per second experience, which is perfect for a console that can be played on the go. And that right there is the thing. I think its gameplay just fits the platform perfectly. It is an arcade-like game by nature, and because the Switch 2 is just so pick up and play, it feels natural in the Switch 2 because you can play some quick, fun games anywhere and anytime you want. So Tony Hawk is a big recommend for the Switch 2. Now, like I said, though, AAA third-party games are actually pretty good on the Switch 2, which is something that I haven't been able to say for a Nintendo console probably since the GameCube, which is kind of crazy to think about. But Yakuza 0 is a great game to pick up for the Switch 2 if you haven't already played it. Yes, it's a bit older by this point, but this is an ongoing franchise that's still very relevant. It seems to get a new release about every year by this point, and it's pretty consistently great because the Yakuza series is arguably among the best story-driven franchises of all time. I personally believe that it is, and that all starts with Yakuza 0. It's actually among my favorite entries because it has an amazing story that really gets everything kicked off. Also, when it comes to the Yakuza games, I'm really not sure if there's another game out there that puts you in Japan quite as good as the Yakuza series. It just bleeds atmosphere. And here's the thing. More Yakuza games are going to come to the Switch 2, so Yakuza 0 is the perfect way to get your journey started. Now, a new Hyrule Warriors game also released exclusively for the Switch 2, being Age of Imprisonment, and it's a franchise that truly needed a Switch 2 version. I know a lot of people really enjoyed the previous entries because they liked the gameplay, and hey, that's perfectly fine, but their biggest issue has always been that the Switch 1 just wasn't powerful enough. Age of Calamity, as one such example, was really a complete mess on the Switch 1. Its performance was all over the place, to say the least, but Age of Imprisonment is completely different. It finally has the hardware that can keep up with its chaotic gameplay. Now, of course, I have to talk about some JRPGs because I personally prefer to play them on a handheld console. I just really enjoy the pick-up-and-play nature that the Switch 2 has to offer for them, and one game that looks and feels absolutely incredible on the Switch 2 is Dragon Quest HD 2D. Now, this is technically 3 different games because all of them do have Switch 2 versions, and let me just tell you, they are a thing of beauty on the Switch 2. And it's not just the visuals, because they are some of the most influential turn-based JRPGs of all time, and for a very good reason. The turn-based combat is a lot of fun, and it can also be challenging. Now, I don't think that the stories are necessarily the main attraction, but for their time, they're still enjoyable enough to immerse yourself into their gorgeous worlds, and again, their great turn-based combat. Now, speaking of JRPGs, one of my all-time favorites got an upgraded version for the Switch 2, being the old 3DS title, Bravely Default. Yes, Bravely Default HD truly looks fantastic on the Switch 2. Now, in terms of gameplay, this is a classic Final Fantasy game in really everything but its name. And, well, there's a pretty good reason for that. It was originally created to be a Final Fantasy game until they eventually shifted it into its own franchise. But really, the story, the adventure, the visuals, the characters, and the class-based system will feel very familiar if you've played some of the old classic Final Fantasy games, specifically right around the Final Fantasy IV era, but the big twist is in how it handles its combat. It uses a Brave default system, hence the name of the game, where you can either default to gain more attacks or to Brave, which allows you to consecutively attack by unloading all of your energy in a single turn. It might sound simple on paper, but this game has a lot of depth to it, especially when you combine it with all of the different jobs that you can access in the game, and I mean, it can just be incredibly challenging at times. So for those that love turn-based combat, fun characters, and a good story, I really can't recommend Bravely Default HD enough. Now, however, if you want a game to just really showcase the power the Switch 2 has to offer, then Cyberpunk 2077 is a great game to pick up. I mean, this is a truly AAA experience with its futuristic open world that will completely immerse you into its atmosphere, its player agency, and its engrossing story. And I think one of the really cool things about the Switch 2 version is that it is a complete product, which was not the case when it originally launched for other consoles years ago. Back then, it was plagued with all kinds of technical issues, but for Nintendo fans, you're going to get a much more pleasing experience from day one. So if you want a AAA open-world RPG, then look no further than Cyberpunk 2077. Now, another really cool thing about the Switch 2 is the fact that a lot of Switch 1 games both look and feel much better on the Switch 2, with one of those being Zelda Breath of the Wild. I mean, that really was an essential game for the Switch 1, and a lot of people even go so far as to say that it is an all-time great. Now, however, if you go back and play that game on a Switch 1, you might notice that its performance, left a lot to be desired. Well, here we are almost a decade later, which is kind of crazy to think about, but it actually looks and feels the way that it should thanks to its Switch 2 upgrade. Now you can truly immerse yourself into one of the most beloved worlds in all of gaming. Next up here on the list, though, is a full-on PSP remake, The Legends of Heroes Trails in the Sky. Now, this has since turned into a long-running series that has an interconnected story. So even though it's widely viewed to be one of the better JRPG franchises that you can play in today's age, it's also very intimidating to get into. Trails in the Sky Remake, though, I would argue kind of changes that, because this is where it all began. And frankly, I think it's also one of the best entries for the franchise as a whole. You play as Estelle, a young, energetic girl who has her life changed when her father adopts a strange, quiet boy who seems to have a troubled past that you know very little about. That really kind of gets the entire premise started, but these two bounce off each other incredibly well as the story progresses and as they grow to become bracers of their own. And I say all that because the story itself and the characters are some of the big highlights for this game. I mean, yes, the gameplay is fun as well, and they do put some new spins on it with the introduction of action-based combat, though I will say I prefer the turn-based, but it's always been the characters and the story that really drew me in. So if those are things that you enjoy as well, then I think Trails in the Sky is a must-play experience. Now, if you want to go all in on gameplay, though, then Hades 2 is a fantastic choice. For the time being, it's actually a Switch 2 console exclusive, which was a bit of a surprise at the time, but it really is a perfect fit for the console. Not only in terms of its art style, but again, the pick-up-and-play nature that the Switch 2 excels in is on full display when you play something like Hades 2. Now, if you've never played Hades, though, it's a roguelike experience, so if you fail to reach the top, that basically means that you're going to have to start over and go back to the beginning. And I know that can be intimidating, but I think that's where Hades, and in this case Hades 2, is so special. Failure in these games never feels frustrating because you're always rewarded with more things like items to help you on your next climb, and also the story itself is rewarding because each time you fail, it unravels just a little bit more. Don't be surprised, though, when you lose 50 to 100 plus hours playing Hades 2, because it truly is just that fun. Oh, and for you Pokemon fans out there, the Switch 2 already has its first legitimate Pokemon game, being Pokemon Legends ZA, which continues the experimentation of the old but beloved Pokemon formula. Instead of turn-based combat, though, Legends ZA experiments with a more action-based system, and while I do still prefer turn-based, the combat in Legends ZA is still a lot of fun and does feel fresh. personally, I really enjoyed this game. Yeah, I know there's been some backlash over its visuals, and I do wonder if that's specifically from people playing on the Switch 1, because for me, I think it looks a lot better on the Switch 2 thanks to its art style and especially its animations. This is some of the best animations that I've seen for a Pokemon game to date. However, I will say that no voice acting is still a glaring issue, and I hope that they do get that eventually fixed up in future titles. Oh, and Mega Evolutions are also back. I'm not necessarily a big fan of a lot of the new gimmicks in recent Pokemon games. I didn't care for Gigantamax or Terra Pokemon, but Mega Evolutions, they are still pretty amazing in my opinion. And not only did we get a lot of returning Mega Evolutions, but we also got some brand new ones like Dragonite and a very strange looking Starmie as well. Now, admittedly, the location in Legends EA can be a bit repetitive, but surprisingly, I also think that it has one of the best stories in a Pokemon game to date. If anything else, I think the Legends series has proven to be a mainstay and a must-play for Pokemon fans. Now, speaking of long-time beloved franchises, Metroid Prime 4 is finally here, and I mean, it's been a long wait. The question, though, is, was it worth it? And I think for the most part, yes. I mean, right away, it's potentially the best-looking Switch 2 game, just period. The visuals and atmosphere are stunning, to say the least, with actual good performance. Now, there has been some backlash over some of its new additions, though. Its open zone desert section isn't all that fun, and not everybody necessarily loves the companion characters either. But I will say, I think some of the complaints online are a bit exaggerated. I think the way I would personally describe it is that it's not necessarily a perfect Metroid game. It does have some downsides, but however, its highs are also extremely high when it does focus on the classic Metroid Prime formula. So when you feel that isolation, the puzzle solving, and the highs of discovering a new hidden item, that's really when it's at its best, and thankfully, you do get to experience a lot of that throughout Metroid Prime 4, even if it's not necessarily consistent throughout the entire game. So in other words, it's a good but largely inconsistent experience. So I think for Nintendo, if they do proceed with an eventual Metroid Prime 5, which I hope they do, I love this franchise, then I think that they need to keep that in mind. You know, make sure to prioritize it being a Metroid Prime experience first and foremost. All in all, though, I think Metroid fans are still going to enjoy Metroid Prime 4. And of course, we have to talk about Mario Kart World, the first brand new Mario Kart installment since 2014 for the Wii U. I mean, that's kind of crazy to think about, but Mario Kart 8 lived on for 2 entire generations with really no slowdown at all. It was actually the most successful Switch 1 game, and I think ultimately Mario Kart World will follow that success, but with a slightly different formula. Mario Kart World centers around the idea of an open world environment, and because of that, the new Battle Royale-like mode is incredibly fun. Now, admittedly, I still think that Mario Kart 8 is better overall just because its tracks are better designed. Mario Kart World has far too many straight stretches for my liking. That is kind of a repercussion of its open world, but I think Nintendo will ultimately fix that as the generation progresses. They will add more levels and make it feel more classic-like as time goes on. All in all, though, the base is there, and Mario Kart World is easily one of the most fun games that you can play on the Switch 2. And then lastly, the game that I think every Switch 2 owner should absolutely try is Donkey Kong Bonanza. I mean, this is not just a typical Collectathon 3D platformer. Rather, it's, I'd say, one of the most unique 3D platformers that I've ever played because it combines all of these destructive elements to its gameplay. And when I first heard that, I immediately thought to myself that that might destroy what makes this genre so special in the first place. But no, that's really not the case. The way I would kind of describe it is that I feel like Bonanza has a controlled destruction that still makes you focus on the problem solving and puzzle elements that you would expect in the 3D platformer genre. It's very unique to say the least, and it is extremely fun as you dig into the planet's core. There's also a few welcome surprises for longtime Donkey Kong and Rare fans, which I absolutely adored. I grew up with Rare, and I also grew up with those games, and just wow. What an amazing game. Donkey Kong Bonanza is a true masterpiece for the Switch 2, and if there's any game that you want to argue makes the Switch 2 worth it, it would absolutely be Bonanza. There you go, though. Those are the 12 games that I think makes the Switch 2 worth it in the early part of its life cycle. And that right there is the thing. I fully expect it to get even better from here on out. So let me know what you all think about this. What are some games that you like for the Switch 2, and do you think it's worth it this early on? Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.